So hello everyone, my name is Dr. Chee-Wee, and I would like to welcome you today to this masterclass in the module Health-Related Activity and Fitness. So in the past 10 to 20 years, there has been an increasing public awareness of the importance of physical activity and how this will impact on our health. Now, it is perhaps a popular idea now that we should all try to achieve about maybe 10,000 steps in our everyday lives just to get a little bit more healthy. And obviously, technology manufacturers have jumped on this bandwagon by pushing to us their latest model of activity monitors. But from all our personal experiences, now getting active is really hard. It's probably harder than it sounds. So what is it that makes us sedentary? And why is it so hard for us to break out of this sedentary behavior? Now, today, to help us understand this topic, we have a special guest. That's Professor Sebastien Chastin. So Professor Sebastien Chastin is the Professor of Behaviour Dynamics at Glasgow Caledonian University. He is also Professor at Ghent University in the Department of Movement and Sports Sciences. His research focuses on understanding how humans spend their time and how this impacts on their personal health. And this is, of course, crucial to promoting healthy movement behavior. And we are very privileged to have him here today with us. Seb, welcome to this interview.
Thank you very much. Good morning or afternoon, depending on when you listen to this.
Yeah, so I was just talking about how hard it is to get active, and all of us can be sometimes fairly physically inactive. But maybe to help us understand a bit about, from your perspective, what is sedentary behavior?
Okay, so sedentary behavior is a concept that appeared in the last 10 years or so. Before that, we only really focused on the time we spend physically active, or actually the time we spend physically inactive. So let's put it in context a little bit, especially in the context of COVID and the experience we are having at the moment, which is really unheard of and an incredible experience. But imagine you had a plane of people landing at Glasgow airport infected with COVID. You would immediately put in place some incredible measures to stop that from spreading. But strangely, we now know that physical inactivity actually kills about 3.5 million people per year in the world. So globally, it's a lot more impactful than COVID is, yet we do very little about it. And there are several reasons for that. So it led me to be really interested in what is inside the inactive time rather than the active time. And this notion of sedentary behavior appeared in the middle of that research. So sedentary behavior is really defined as the time we spend with very little energy expenditure and in a position of our body that is either seated or lying down, reclining. So it has this double definition, but essentially it's the time we spend sitting. And it's the time, you'll be surprised if you try to think about how much time you spend sitting every day. You'd be surprised to find out that you're likely to sit for over 10 hours a day. Wow. So that takes up the vast majority of our time every day, while physical activity only really takes up about 2% of our day, which is at best 30 minutes per day. So it's a vast amount of time. And does that time have an impact on health? And can we offset that impact by being physically active? Is really the center of the research that's going on at the moment.
Yeah.
So why are we so sedentary? Well, that's a really hard question, actually. And it's one that is not very well resolved. And there's two ways of approaching that problem. The first one is to think in terms of the determinants, so the factors that make you sedentary. So we can think of several factors, and usually what researchers do, they try to organize that in their mind by using a framework. So you can think about the ecological framework, which sees people at the center of the problem, and around them some rings of influence or factors. So the first ring would be a personal ring, so that thing to do with my behavior, my psychology. A ring after that would be my interpersonal relationship with other people. So for example, if my family is sitting down watching telly, well, I'm probably more likely to sit down with them and mimic their behavior. The ring around that is the environment we are living in, working in, and that, you can imagine being students at university, that in that environment you're probably quite pushed to be seated down all day listening to lectures. Although as physiotherapy students, for example, you might have to stand up and actually look around and be physically active by practicing some of our techniques. And around that, you can think about another layer of influence, which is policy. So for example, if you're at work and you're working in a supermarket, you're behind a cash desk and you might not be able to just stand up and walk around. You are forced by policy of your employer to sit down, and you might only get a break every so often. So there's all these different layers of influence that basically determine or dictate how much time we're going to be spending sitting. What's interesting to notice is over the course of human history, what we see is a distinct trend toward spending less and less energy every day. So we have developed a society which is very successful and very efficient. And we've done that by trying to minimize movement and maximize our output. And you can see this in the rise of, for example, the fact that in the 1970s, 80s, physiotherapy was really concerned with the problem of back pain that people were experiencing at work, was sitting a lot. And our answer to that was generally an ergonomic answer. So we tried to develop chairs that were more comfortable.
Yep.
Therefore, we would sit for longer without pain and continue working. And you can see that what we've done actually is to increase and encourage less movement in the work. So that is a distinct trend that we are appearing that seems to be global and very much based around almost a reptilian reflex that we have as in our condition of humans, because our body is incredibly efficient in terms of movement. We are made to move. The fact that we sweat is the thing that really puts us at a distinction from other species. We cannot outrun a cheetah, but we can keep going, provided you give enough food and enough drinks. You will eventually catch up with a cheetah, because a cheetah will have to stop because the body temperature of the cheetah, because they don't sweat, will rise up and the physiology will start collapsing. But we have multiple examples of people that are able to run for ultra marathons and incredible distances. So the fact that we are really well made to move, but deep down in our mind, there is this reflex that we are meant to conserve energy. And essentially, historically, it's because food sources were quite scarce. So we have to minimize the amount of energy we expend to go and get that source of energy. And we have developed essentially a behavior over the centuries that reflects that, and it's entirely reflected in our society. So the way we have food sources now is they are very well organized. They are either very proximal to us, so you can go around a corner to Tesco and get a kebab, or you can just take your car and go to one place where you'll find everything, with as a supermarket. So we can get energy without movement very much. And we've based everything in our society on this. So cities are developed that way, our modes of working are thought this way as well. And as a student, you experience that. We think that the only way you can learn is by sitting down and listening to one or two person talking. And we think that's the most efficient way of doing things. But it might be counterproductive.
Well, it's a nice idea to think that I can outrun, at least run longer than a cheetah. So that's an interesting thing to know. Now, as you can, I can understand that over time and with all the multi-layers of influences, we are basically led to think and sort of motivated not to move as much as you've implied. So the question now is, how do we then encourage people to be more active and disincentivize them, or at least not give them the motivation to then be sedentary? Is it even possible to do so?
I think it is possible to do so, but that would require some measures at every level of these influences, and very structural measures. So let's put in place. Take the example of a physiotherapist, and I've been a physiotherapist for several years. And when I was in musculoskeletal unit, for example, my first therapeutic interaction with a patient that came to see me for, I don't know, neck pain or back pain or a problem with their ankle was to say, please sit down and let's discuss the problem. So immediately I was conditioned to actually make my patient sit down rather than being active. And we see this at the scale of an hospital, for example. We've organized the hospital in such a way that it's very efficient for the staff to go around patients. But that means, and we've done this, we've actually measured this in geriatric units, that a patient that comes in for rehabilitation actually spends most of the day in bed and would maybe 30 minutes of physical activity with a physiotherapist. That can't be the right way of doing things. We should be restructuring the hospital so that movement is a lot more encouraged, is much more conducive. Similarly, at work, we have to do that. Transportation is the same problem. So there are levels of things we can do with individual behavior, and for sure, using some of the devices you mentioned it's a good way. I have one for sure. It beeps for me every time I'm sitting too long because as an academic, I sit a lot. But I have organized my office so I have a standing desk, so I can change position a lot. I've organized my way of working with colleagues in such a way that we have to actually walk to each other's office rather than emailing each other. So these are simple behavioral things I can do. But I've also encouraged our university to make standing desk more widespread. We also have changed the position of the bins, for example, to force people to go and move more.
Yeah.
But there are deeper things we can do. And in that respect, I think physiotherapists have a crucial role to play because they can really inform policymakers about what is safe and not safe to do, about how to approach these structural changes and how to bring back movement in every level of societal engagement.
So what you're suggesting is that these actions to incentivize people and perhaps make some change and make people more active is both at the local level, structural level, service level, but also at the policy level then?
Yes, absolutely. So one example that is often a breaking point is if you think about fall risk. So if you're in a geriatric unit again, and I'm talking a lot about older adults because they are the most sedentary segment of society, and it's an overlooked problem. But if you go to an hospital and you have full risk as an older adult, you're likely to be in a unit where even a physiotherapist might put a red light, green light system around, and you'll be disencouraged to move because the hospital is worried about you falling. Why? Because the hospital has an insurance policy. So until we can change that insurance policy, your manager as a physio is going to discourage you from mobilizing people.
Okay.
We can also, as physio, campaign to have more physios involved. And maybe after COVID is a good time to do that because we are likely to see an opportunity to have more healthcare professionals and them being better treated in terms of salaries and working conditions.
Yeah.
Is maybe to campaign to say, well, we need more physios because people need mobilized. And if we want to do it safely, then we need more physios. So I see sedentary behavior as a real opportunity for physiotherapists.
Yes, I mean, it was actually quite nice that you mentioned about the COVID-19 situation. I mean, as you're fully aware, and the reason why we're talking right now over a video link is because we're currently living under lockdown. Do you think this will have an impact on people's sedentary behavior? And what will happen? I mean, what will be the future impact on this nation's health if this lockdown actually continues for longer than we would like it to be?
Okay. We don't have precise data, unfortunately, about what's happening to people's kind of daily time and how they spend their time. But it's very likely that people are going to spend more time sitting. And that is likely to be time they would normally spend commuting or walking around one department to another, these kind of things. And probably the leisure time is spent a lot more in doing things like watching Netflix and essentially in sedentary behaviors. We might see, hopefully, that physical activity as in exercise has gone up. It's difficult to tell right now. But what's interesting is what we do when we come out of this. And there's two elements to that. I've been reading a lot of research that has been done on, historical research has been done on the Spanish flu. And people that survived that, the testimony says that it took them a long time for their behavior to go back to normal, both in terms of their social relations to others, but actually to go back to a normal life. So if we indeed have a trend of more sedentary behavior, the likelihood is this might persist for some time, and that would be undesirable.
Yeah.
Specifically, we are trying to do some research at the moment. We are very well aware that sedentary behavior has an impact on chronic diseases. So cardiovascular disease, diabetes, pulmonary diseases, and that is almost independent of how much exercise you do, because the level of exercise you would have to do to offset the negative effect of sitting too much is very, very high. It's around 2 hours of exercise a day. Which is a lot, which is achievable for some people. For the majority of the population, that's quite hard.
Yeah.
But what we are starting to understand now is actually being fitter and more physically active also makes you more resilient to infection or to infectious disease. And that might be one of the benefits of COVID, is that actually we've done a lot of research recently into that. So we might get in some benefit, but if we stay too sedentary, we might be actually deconditioning ourselves and making ourselves a lot more prone to having viral infections and having complications from that.
Okay. So there might be impact not just on our local, very, very instantaneous, immediate environment on our health, but also perhaps future impact as well.
Yep. So the best thing that student physio can do and physiotherapists can do at the moment is to keep campaigning and campaigning for a simple thing: more movement. In every moment of life, more is better, and not being so focused on what type or just more movement as often as possible. That is essentially the message, and that's the message in most guidelines nowadays. I'm involved in the development of the new World Health Organization guidelines for physical activity, and it's essentially what they're going to say: move more often.
Okay. So we talked about what students can do and what physios can do, and perhaps some of the impact that potentially this lockdown might have in the future for us as a population, as a nation. I mean, in your opinion, what is the future for research for tackling sedentary behavior?
I think the research, the evidence base in terms of the health impact of sedentary behavior and physical activity are very well established. So the frontier now in terms of research are twofold. First of all, we need to understand really what is the right balance of time we need to spend exercising, being physically active, and sitting. I mean, we're going to have to sit. Nobody can be on their feet. It's probably not a good idea either. So we need to achieve the right cocktail, if you want, the right cocktail of time. So understanding that cocktail of time and how we put it together, how often we have to move to be optimum for our health, that's one element of the future research. The second element of future research is really to understand more about what we can do to reintroduce movement in society as a whole. Generally, that in the past we've done that through the scope of behavior change and through sport promotion. So behavior change and sport promotion, well, in terms of sport participation, we know that we've done really well because despite the fact that we're spending less and less energy every day, sport participation and the amount of energy we spend in sport as a population is actually remained pretty stable or even increased. So that has done some good, but unfortunately, that's a teardrop in an ocean. So it might not be the best vector to do that. Similarly, behavioral approach don't seem to work all that well. The World Health Organization has had a target of reducing physical inactivity by 10% by 2025. And the latest reports on the trends globally tell us that we are nowhere near meeting that target. So we need to find new levers. And these levers are probably at a higher, more distal level. So they're probably around policy, they're probably around changing our environment, and changing our cities, changing the way we work, and changing the way we structured our daily life, essentially.
Well, it actually doesn't sound as simple as it is, because it's going to be a societal change, rather not just at an individual level.
Yeah, and I think, again, physiotherapists have a really important role to play in this, because if we leave it to people that don't understand movement, they're going to keep on thinking that it's all about sports. But if you ask a physiotherapist how a city should be designed, they'll probably have, or she will probably have, a very, very interesting propositions to make about how we can make it accessible to all, because it has to be a universal design. We can't design things for movement, but only for people that are able and capable of climbing stairs and all these things. But at the same time, if we give escalator to everybody, then suddenly we take away movement. So physiotherapists will have really interesting things to say, and we should encourage our students to really engage with that, because it's also maybe a new and exciting type of jobs they can create for themselves in the future.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Professor Seb Chastin, and thank you so much for having a chat with us and answering all our questions about sedentary behavior. Thank you so much.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.